I became interested in physics when we came to Aspen probably about 20 years ago, and a good friend of mine who was reading a great deal about physics at the time gave me a set of Feynman's books, and I read a good deal about that. Then shortly afterwards, I met Jeremy Bernstein at my friend the Cato's. We saw him several times for dinner, and I think it must have been about that time when the physicists were deciding that maybe the Physics Center was deciding that it wanted to go outside of what was always called the circle of serenity and go into the community and raise some money. And Jeremy asked me if I would like to be on the board, and I was flattered, and I said yes. I will tell you about my first board meeting. I have always been trained, if I don't know someone at a table, to walk around the table at a dinner party, for instance, and say, hello, my name is Ed Hudson, that sort of thing. So I walked in, and there was a large table, and I walked down one side of it and shook hands with about 5 people, I guess, and said, hello, I'm Ed Hudson. And not one of them gave me his or her name. So I decided this was not protocol at a meeting. Over the years, I've fingered various other friends who I thought would be interested in being on the board. And one of these was Garland Lassiter, a good friend of mine, graduate of Princeton, did very well in business and is now something of a philanthropist. And he does problems in pure mathematics, which I appreciate. Anyway, I asked him to be on the board, and I said, Garland, they're not going to get in your pocket. Don't worry. So lo and behold, the first meeting he was asked to go to was a committee I was on called Development. And Garland said, sounds like money to me. I said, Garland, this is my 3rd Development Committee meeting. Just wait. So we went, and there were about 8 or 10 people there, and we spent somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours discussing the situation and development and that sort of thing. And for the 3rd year in a row, decided that we didn't need to raise any money at all. My involvement in the fundraising of the new building started off on sort of a difficult note. I was at a meeting, I believe, of the full board, and Dave Schramm, who is a wonderful person, I adored Dave Schramm, sort of threw a curved ball at me. He announced, without having said one word to me about it, that I was going to be in charge of the fund drive. And at that time in my life, it was not possible for me to take that on. And I said, Dave, we need to discuss this. So I agreed to help with arranging things, pointing out people who I thought would be donors and that sort of thing. That was my involvement really in the fund drive.
So you were one of the people who made contacts?
Yes, I helped make contact with people who I thought would be generous. I'm afraid what happens with the Physics Center is they look across the way at the Aspen Institute. My wife has been on the board of the Institute for about 20 years, and consequently, as a spouse, I'm pretty familiar with what goes on over there. And the physicists look and they see all of this going on. But what they don't realize is there are probably 150 or 200 people making all of this happen. And for something like that to occur here at the Physics Center is a huge strain on Jane Kelly or whoever else happens to be there. And when they said they wanted to go outside of the circle of serenity and do some things like the Institute, I said, are you really sure you want to do this? Because you may have to hire people in order to do it. You may, if you've formed some sort of support group, you might have to invite them to dinner all the time, and you might have to have them to your thing, and you might have to, the care and feeding of those donors is going to drive you probably nuts, and I'm not sure you really want to do it. In any case, one winter, they came to me and they said, we'd really like to get outside the circle of serenity and involve some people here in town. And it was during the winter lecture series, when I think about once a week for 4 or 5 weeks, some person who is here probably on other business, but gives a very interesting lecture. And I said, has it ever occurred to you to have a dinner party, either before or after the lecture, and invite some of these people that you're interested in? Well, it was like the scales falling from Saul's eyes. They had never thought of it. And as a matter of fact, I don't think it worked out very well, because the people who gave the lectures didn't like to have dinner beforehand, And since the lectures were at 8 o'clock, it was too late afterwards.
One good idea gone by.
I actually, my wife and I had a dinner party one January about 2 or 3 years ago. And I had sort of aimed it at certain people that I thought would be here in town, and then they weren't. And it was a cold January, and there weren't many people here anyway, and I was practically out on Main Street passing out invitations. Recently, they asked me if my wife and I would have a dinner party after Wyman's lecture, the Nobel scientist from Boulder, who gave a wonderful lecture. My wife said that if her physics professor at the University of Texas had spoken like Wyman, that she might have taken a second course in physics. But it worked out very well. I aimed it at involving people in the town who were not necessarily involved in the Physics Center. For instance, Janet O'Grady, who has Aspen Magazine, then a new friend of ours, Vera Komplinsky, who is head of music at Juilliard, and other people like that. And then people from the Institute, Susan Sherman, who is in charge of development, and Walter Isaacson came, and Amy Marjoram and her husband, all from the Institute, and all involved in hopefully getting some joint programs between the Institute and the Aspen Physics going. When we were raising money for the new building, I was given a phrase that I have since been told by a fundraiser from New York is what you call an elevator phrase. And it's what you say to someone when you meet them on the elevator and you're trying to pique their interest in whatever it is you're raising money for with a single thing. And the phrase I was given was, and I've always said every word as you examine it is important, that of the major developments in theoretical physics over the last 30 years, 80 or 90% began in Aspen, Colorado. That's very impressive. And I'm told it's almost true.
Wow.
And that to me is the importance of the Physics Center, is that it does this and continues to do it. I think part of the magic of the Physics Center is Aspen, Colorado. I mean, we are here, it's a beautiful place. Most physicists seem enamored of mountains or fishing or hiking or similar things like that. Most seem to enjoy the music a great deal. And most people that I know, when asked to come to Colorado, to Aspen in particular, come. And I think having a beautiful campus like this with the trees and that sort of thing, people just sitting out. I've always been told this is how it works. I have not actually seen it working, but that they sit out and they speak to one another and they knock ideas against each other, and so things progress.
Have you ever been associated with any other organization which is so much run by the participants?
Most of the other boards that I'm on involve museums. I'm on the board of the Kimball Museum and the Contemporary Museum in Fort Worth. And my wife and I have been on support groups for the National Gallery and the Whitney Museum, and then we began a support group for the Aspen Art Museum here. And really in no cases are those run by the artists themselves. They're all run by trustees who are mainly drawn from business or collectors themselves or that sort of thing. So this is, to a degree, unique. I was once told, and I think it's partially true, that the Music Associates is somewhat run by the musicians. I think they are given a certain number of seats on the music board, or they at least participate in the governance of the Music Associates. That and the Aspen Center for Physics are about the only two that I know of that are run that way. I began skiing when I was about 28 years old. A friend of ours built John Murkison's house in Vail and also built what was known as the Texas townhouses, one of which was his own, and it would sleep around 20 or 30 people. So he would invite, we were all young married people, we would rent a Denver sightseeing bus and go to Vail. And good taste prevailed about 2 years later, and we all moved over to Aspen. And so we've been coming here for years. My wife and I would stay at the Aspen Alps because it was run by someone we knew. And I would ski, and Ann, who doesn't ski, would read and move from one end of the couch to the other to avoid bed sores. We came one summer and bought a house and at 5th and Francis, principally so we could walk over to the music. And as our family grew, it got smaller and smaller and smaller. So we built another house. We bought another house and have been there for about 15 years now. We were the other end of the block from Murray. Yeah. And it was a great, who's the old architect? Fritz Benedict house, very much like the Aspen Alps. And although it was a contemporary house as opposed to the Victorian houses that you can lift off and put it down again. And we sold it to someone who I know didn't intend to tear it down. But then he found out that if he tore it down, he could dig a basement and make it much bigger than it was. So that's what happened.
There wasn't any restriction on Fritz Benedict houses?
Not then. The new building at the Institute, which will be begun this fall, it's the last building they will build, and was given primarily by Hosier and John Doerr and Jerry Murdoch, and has been designed by a man named Jeff Burkus, who is living behind Murray's Blue House with his wife. And his father is a leading architect in California, I think. In any case, it's going to look nothing like Herbert Bayer. Oh. Yeah. I am so, well, that's not quite true, but it is not going to be exactly like that. It's going to have a great deal more natural feel about it. And an artist named Andy Goldsworthy has been hired. Who, he's wonderful, Englishman. What? And he is doing a single piece of art, but it begins in the parking lot with red sandstone, like a stream curving through, and then it will come sort of above ground as you walk in, sort of along a coast like this. Then there's a pond, and I guess it goes sort of underground, but goes through the building itself, inlaid in the floor. Then goes out on the other side, and I'm not sure what happens on the other side to end it there, but across the river will be a cairn, a stone cairn, that this will all be looked at. They raised the money. Walter got busy and raised $7 million, and then two people, or a couple here in town, just gave them $2 million more, which is enough to complete it. And then a couple gave the whole $1 million for Andy Goldsworthy. So it's going to be beautiful. There was one room planned here. I think for reasons of cost, it's not going to be built this way, but it was going to be a space like an egg. Oh, no. And it was a meeting room, and suspended in the middle would be the floor that the meeting would take place on. And then all of the interior of the egg would be lined with like oak branches.
Like a little Druids. It'd be like where the Druids
yes.
Something like that. Sounds like Shakespeare.